What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Free Speed Podcast, your go-to podcast for navigating fitness and life with purpose. We're your hosts, Calvin Fogler.
And I'm Natasha Bozic.
And today is episode 20, which is crazy because when we first started this podcast, the one goal that Tash and I had was just to be consistent enough to get to episode 21. And the reason we wanted to get to episode 21 was because it was either something we read or Chris Williamson's podcast. He was mentioning that why are you laughing?
You know why, guys? Because we've recorded this 3 times and he still goes, yeah, I think it's Chris Williams' podcast. No, you know it's his podcast.
Well, no, it was like no, because I had heard this roughly before, but then he mentioned it in one of his podcasts.
No, I know.
Chris Williamson didn't say it.
It's just funny because like we're trying to pretend like this is our first take, but it's actually our 4th take.
Because we get 5 minutes in, and then there was like a technical difficulty, and we had to restart. Anyway, but so
sorry.
The stat is that only 10% of podcasts make it past episode 3, and of those 10%, only 10% make it past episode 20. So by making it to episode 21, then it ultimately makes you in the top 1% of podcasts. And like that was ultimately the goal when we first started, was just making it into the top 1%, because it would just mean that we stuck to the consistent nature of it, and we actually gave it a chance to learn and develop and get better at it. And hopefully you guys enjoy these episodes as much as we do. But today's episode is going to be about half marathon training. So Tash and I did our first half marathons last year. And I just think that was what we started in, and we've learned a lot. And I think a lot of people who listen to this either want to sign up for one or get into them. But so this episode's going to be all about just the ultimate guide to racing a strong half marathon.
Yeah, so right now Calvin and I are in marathon training. I haven't actually started my marathon training block yet, but we're about to start our full marathon training block. But basically, we're going to be talking about the half marathon today because I feel like it's the most approachable race distance, and it's actually my first ever running race that I've ever done. So last year I completed my first half marathon in May, and I started from scratch. Like, I had no running ability whatsoever. Like, I was not an athlete at all growing up. I didn't run at all. So just being able to accomplish that distance, although some people might think it's not the hardest distance, it's still very, very challenging, but it's also the most approachable, I feel like. And the half marathon is a great challenge, and it's long enough to, test your endurance, but short enough to, train for it without it taking over your whole life. Just because marathon training, it takes a lot more time and effort and discipline. But if you're interested, and keep listening to this episode is going to be for those first-time half marathoners, those that are, wanting to PR their next half marathon, or anyone who's just looking to train a bit smarter in terms of hybrid training, running, lifting, or
I think that's a good point that you bring up about the hybrid training, because what I noticed is my last Hyrox prep, and just the amount of running, because there's 9K of running in a Hyrox race, following a very similar plan to what a half marathon, it's not as much maybe as a half marathon training block, but in terms of training for a half marathon rather than a marathon, you can definitely incorporate a bit more weight training.
Yeah, for sure.
And a little less volume. Whereas like your long runs and your marathon training might get up to like 30K, which is really long.
Your Sunday long runs are going to be 3-4 hours long.
Yeah, which is nuts.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about this. So this past weekend, Tash and I went up to the Sunshine Coast in Australia, that's where our marathon is. And I know this is how I felt when I finished my first half marathon, was like, holy shit. Like, imagine having to run backwards and redo that.
The whole thing.
So I had planned to drive the marathon route, and we only did like 33 of the 42K when we were there this past weekend. But I think one of the nice things about driving it is you get familiar like with where you're going to be and like where everything is and kind of understanding the course. But I also think one of the negatives is when you drive and see how far it is.
Yeah,
you're like,
holy shit.
that just took me like 45 minutes to drive.
And there were so many hills, guys. Like this Sunshine Coast.
But I don't think
marathon.
I don't think it's actually as hilly as
okay.
it seemed to us. When I went back on the Strava, the elevation gain isn't as dramatic.
Okay.
So I think it should work its way out, but I know what you mean. So
But
what did you think of
anyways,
just the distance when we drove it?
When we drove it, it was like, that's far. Like the fact that it took us almost an hour to drive it, like I was just like, I have to run that in August. Like I'm excited, but at the same time, I'm mostly worried about getting injured. That's like the number one thing for me is just I do not want to get injured, and I know a lot of people do get injured in marathon training blocks, just because of the overuse injury. Like you're just running on the concrete for hours every week. So
yeah, I think the number one fear that people have, because people who are not necessarily like super light feathery people and just like very experienced with tons of running volume, it takes a lot of time to build up like the bone density and like the mitochondria to get the adaptations. And so when you go from like not running a ton to even to a marathon prep, I think that's what a lot of the high level running coaches will talk about, is just like, maybe let's not set such a crazy ambitious goal, because you might be able to do it if you could stay healthy, but you're likely to find a weakness in your body that will shut your training down so fast. And that's the nice thing about, I think, half marathon training for anyone who's listening, is it's such a great distance because it's far enough where you're not going to do this distance very often.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did that 25K in January, but since then I've done one run that was anywhere near a half marathon distance. And ultimately I think the reason I stay far away from it is because I notice my body starts to get a little injured if I'm not careful. Mm-hmm. And so that's like it's a perfect distance where a lot of people can build up comfortably up to 5 to 10 even to 15K runs. But once you get up to like 21K, it's definitely like something that you want to save for like a race or something that excites you or motivates you a little bit more.
What we're going to be covering today is the fundamentals and what you need to run 21.1 kilometers. We're going to be talking about setting a half marathon goal time. We're going to be talking about staying healthy and injury prevention, race fueling, race strategy, and recovery. So keep listening, guys, if you're interested.
So let's start with the fundamentals and what you need to run a half marathon, 21.1 kilometers.
Yeah, so running is one of those sports where you don't need much. You don't need much, but what you do need is a pair of good running shoes. And when I say good, I mean a pair of running shoes that is from a well-known brand, not your just trainers that have been in your closet for the past 5-6 years that you wore 6 years ago.
Because the shoe technology has developed significantly in the last 10 years.
And I know, like, when I was running in high school and stuff in our fitness classes and whatnot, we didn't know anything about running shoes. You just throw on, like, any kind of shoes you had and you just go for a run. But the amount that, like, I've learned from running shoes in the past couple of years and the amount that is on the market right now, you just need to go to the running store and get your feet checked out, or just go on and just try on a bunch of shoes that feel good for you.
I need to ask you a question. Yeah. Wait, okay, so if you guys listen to Tash's episode, she talked about her P-Fit class and like that's when she started running, but that's when you screwed up your knee.
Yeah, that's probably why.
Were you running that in Converse? Like,
no, I wasn't running in Converse, but
I would have laughed
I was
my
running. Do you know the old like Nike Free Run shoes?
Yeah, just very minimal.
That had
very
like
minimal,
the very minimal. And now, guys, I wear like a Max Cushion.
Because it's a cloud.
Yeah.
No, it's nice. Like just the evolution of shoe technology over the last 10 years it just changed everything. And Tash knows that I kind of nerd out about it, and want to spend more money
So
than I
so the
actually have
funniest
on
part
shoes.
was this, I think it was like a year and a half ago, when we both moved down to San Jose to live together for the summer. And the first day that we got there, after doing the whole road trip, we went to Sports Basement, which is like a
Sporting goods.
It's like a sporting goods store. They have a bunch of different running shoes, and they're very well known for having good running shoes. But the reason we like that store is because all the shoes are on display right there, so you don't have to ask someone, oh, can you go to the back and get me a pair? Like, no, it's just it's
And-
there, and you can try them on.
Oh my god, is that
but-
that is the worst thing. Sorry, that is a huge pet peeve of mine. Is like
yeah, when they have to go and
when
get
you go
the
to the
back,
store
yeah.
and they have to go back to the back, check your size, and come back. Like, that person actually makes you feel like they hate their life
I know.
every time you ask. And so
Literally.
the stores that you can just like try on every shoe in front of you,
Yeah.
oh my
It's
god,
a lifesaver.
lifesaver.
But anyways, I vividly remember this was before I got into running. So Calvin dragged me to the store, and he's like, I'm going to try and find a pair of running shoes. And I remember sitting there for 2 hours. Was it 2 hours?
Close to an
2
hour and a half,
hours?
yeah.
And he tried on 20 pairs of shoes on and off, and would like be having one on one foot, one on the other, and then would switch. And then he had like a pros and cons table of like every single shoe. And I didn't understand. Like, back then, I didn't know about running. I didn't care about running. So in my head, I'm like, what is this guy doing? Just like, this is so annoying. But now I'm like, I get it, because I do that all the time. I go into the stores and just try on a bunch of shoes and leave with nothing, because I'm like,
Yeah,
whatever.
it's funny how intricate like the shoe trying on process is, and even just like the sizing. Like, every shoe, from their super shoes to their easy day trainers,
Yeah.
they might fit differently. And so back then, like, just to understand what I was doing is like, I wanted to know how they fit and what shoe I would want, but I also didn't really need a shoe at that moment. And so
Yeah.
I was just like trying to like decide between a few different things that were carbon plate versus non-carbon plate, and like stack height versus and all these different things that you can get into and get more in the weeds of.
mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I think what Tash and I will both say is, just with a running shoe, is find a shoe that is comfortable
For
and
you.
fits well, because
Yeah.
you're going to get the best payoff from a shoe that just allows you to be consistent and enjoy the way it feels.
Yeah, so let me tell you a story. So when I did start running, which was the end of the summer that we were living together in San Jose, we went back to Sports Basement. And I said, you know what, like, I'm just going to trust the person who works here. I'm going to ask them what they think. So she looks at my feet. We do the test where you see if you're overpronate or underpronate and whatever. And she's like, okay, it looks like you need a stability shoe. And I was like, okay, not knowing what a stability shoe was at the time. And I was like, okay, no problem, whatever. She gives me a couple shoes to try on. And I ended up trying on a pair of On Cloud runners. And I tried them on, and they were super comfy in the store, and I liked them. But I didn't really understand what difference was between that and like the On Cloud Monster, which is a more cushioned shoe. And I didn't really understand what the difference was, but she basically told me that I needed a stability shoe, and the On Cloud Runner was one of the only shoes that was wide enough for my feet. So I went with that shoe and started running in them, and I got the worst shin splints I've ever gotten in my life. And that's the only time I've ever gotten shin splints in my life. And what I've learned from that is that sometimes whatever someone tells you in the store might not be true. You just need to try on shoes that feel good for you, because although she said I needed a stability shoe, I really didn't, because I needed something that had way more cushion, because my knees are just not great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a part of it. I think there's a lot of different things that you can get into. I think it's really difficult for people who have wide feet, because it's like in the store you were like, oh, these don't fit right, and you were so set on getting a new pair of shoes, and it's just very difficult when you have wide feet, because you don't have all the options that someone else might have. But I also think like how you run can impact it.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
even I just want to touch on just like the options of all the brands. Like I was recently watching this video, and this person was dropping a marble. So it's the inside of a shoe, the inside of every super shoe, from like anywhere from New Balance, Nikes, Sauconys, Adidas, like every shoe that was like any elite marathoner was running. They drop a marble, Pumas, and the marble would bounce up depending on like the foam. Basically trying to test how springy that foam
Yeah, like
is.
the technology of it.
And the ruler was, all the shoes would range between around 30 millimeters to 50 millimeters in how much the marble would like ricochet. And it's interesting because that test had no real actual application to running. However, it was like trying to show how springy the foam is. So on one hand, you're like, the springiest foam would give me the fastest shoe, which surprisingly enough was the Puma Nitro Deviate Elite. So Puma's new High Rock shoe is the springiest foam out of all of those that it was showing. And the New Balance was like 20 millimeters in terms of how much that marble would ricochet. But it's like, ultimately, the shoe needs to also be right for your foot and how you run. And so if you're a heel striker versus if you strike in the forefront, or even just the weight of the shoe makes a difference, right? Like if you're wearing some sort of super, super light Nike shoe, that like, if having a very light shoe for you makes you a faster runner rather than a little bit heavier but springier, then maybe that's right for you. And I think that's what we want to just emphasize, is the right shoe for you. It's number one, how it feels, but then also kind of understanding the technology like that.
The next point we want to talk about in terms of fundamentals is base mileage. So what we mean by this is that you should be consistently running a few times a week before jumping into half marathon training. So if you're a beginner runner and you've never run before, what we would recommend is something Calvin did when he started his marathon training. Is he did, I think, 2 kilometers a day every day for how long?
2 weeks.
So that might be a little too much if you're brand new and never run before. Calvin has a base, like
Fitness,
fitness and athletic just from being an athlete his whole life. But if you've never run before, I would maybe start like going like 5-10 minutes a few times a week, and then maybe the second week bring that up to like 1 or 2 days more, and then start doing the third week every single day, just a little bit. You need to be building time on your feet just so you can get your joints and everything used to the impact of running outside, just because it's so different. And also treadmills are so different than running outside as well. So I feel like mixing in both of those, if you're a treadmill runner, to make sure you're getting outside as well, you really need to be doing that, because you do not want to be on the treadmill for your whole half marathon training block and then do your half marathon outside, and it is a whole different feeling. Your joints will not be liking that.
No.
Yeah.
And just, I think something that can help your brain when you're doing 2K every day, like if you're running a 6-minute kilometer or even 7-minute kilometer, which is like definitely manageable, that's a 14-minute run, 2K each day. So if you did 14 minutes before like you shower, and that like you kind of use the shower as the carrot, that's how you can kind of use that as motivation. And I think you need to implement things to be more consistent in your life, because ultimately that's what will shut you down faster than anything. Is just do 2K every day to get that loading phase, and then you'll be ready. Tash, you said that perfectly.
Perfect. The next thing is long runs. So the key to building your endurance for a half marathon is building up towards your long runs before race day. And the only way to do this the right way is by following a training plan and building every week. And there's something also that we want to touch on, which is the 10% rule. You do not want to be adding more than 10% to your mileage every week, because if you do this, you're going to shock your system, and that's where you can get very injured. So yeah, you just want to gradually increase. When I was training for my first half marathon, I followed a training plan, and I think the first long run was like 4K. Like that was like a long run.
Really?
Yeah, it was like for beginners.
Okay, yeah.
But then it built on that every
So, like,
week.
yeah.
And obviously there are different programs for everyone. Like some of them will probably start at 10K. Like
Yeah.
now for my first marathon, it'll probably start at like a 10K
Yeah.
kind of thing. But basically you want to build up to around, I would say, like 17
yeah.
to 20K before race day.
I think anyone, like, you could go into a half marathon, and if you've ran 14K, you've ran 2/3 of it.
Yeah.
Like, you could probably get a half. You could sneak out a half marathon.
You could probably finish, but it would be painful.
But in terms of like when you're talking about racing a half marathon and getting comfortable with like threshold, and your experience with the distance, and that's when you'd want to have more experience at those like 15 to 18 kilometers, and just like what you're saying, in terms of strength and mobility, just to finish off these fundamentals, you have to remember when you go into a half marathon plan, and that's the focus and that's the goal, that you prioritize your mobility and your health as the first two things when you go into your strength sessions. Is when you go in, it's putting on the band around your feet and doing like the banded sidewalks. It's doing little things.
Foam rolling.
Yeah. It's doing the little 1% things that are going to help your running health and like your hip health and your joint health. And then you can also implement like having a good warm up, and then maybe building some stronger legs or something like hamstring development. This is where I want to get into this though, because it's very, very important. If you are starting a half marathon training block or even a marathon training block, if you're going to do hamstring and calf and even tib fib work, which like the tib fib is like the front stuff here, where you're going to kind of develop some stronger muscles that will help prevent shin splints. If you're doing calf raises or even those tib raises, be very careful when the volume gets high. And this is always been my experience. Like, you need to incorporate this before you've started running in your strength program. And then I would say within the first few weeks, like, keep it. And that's when I think you can almost kind of peter it off and stop it altogether, because you're going to be running so many kilometers, you're going to be activating your Achilles and your calves so much that if you hit a strength session and are just destroying your calves, and then you go right into this like calf raising exercise, you're going to be just destroying your posterior chain, your hamstrings and your calves are going to be so tight, you're going to get injured, and like ultimately that's what's going to shut you down. So I'd be very careful with anyone who's starting out. Be very careful about hitting the calves and just the hamstrings too much. But I definitely think it's important in your off season and leading into a training block to keep you really healthy and be able to get to those long runs.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you're going to be training like calf raises or, tib raises or whatever during your strength sessions, and then the next day you have a run and you wake up and you're like, oh my God, my calves are so sore. Your run's going to feel like shit. Like, there's just no way that that's going to feel good. And I learned that the hard way. I was doing calf raises in my strength training during my half marathon training. And after I did that once, I completely took it out, because I remember the feeling of running on sore calves, and it literally was the worst feeling ever. And it can cause even more injury, and you do not want that.
Yeah.
It might work for some people, but for me and for Calvin, it just doesn't work in terms of, doing long distance.
Especially
running.
Like the half marathon training block that you could do, like you could go as little as 8 weeks maybe, but yeah, that standard 8 to 12 week block, once you're within 8 weeks, I would definitely be very conservative with how much you hit those.
The next one that we wanted to touch on very quickly was speed and threshold work. So you want to be incorporating your tempo runs and your speed sessions just 1 to 2 times a week, just to make sure that you're building efficiency. So one way to do this, if you're a beginner, is to incorporate fartlek runs. And these runs are a type of interval session where you're going to do, like, for example, like 1 minute of hard running and then like 1 minute of easy running. So you're just getting your body used to these threshold paces. And I feel like this is probably more just important if you're actually trying to race your half marathon. If you're just going out to just run your half marathon and finish your speed sessions, like, you don't need to prioritize them necessarily, but they will be very beneficial if you want to get faster at your running.
And yeah, exactly, that last point is to simplify how speed sessions help you is the base that you develop, like your easy runs that are under, say, 140 heart rate in that zone 2, like those allow you to build this foundation, and then the one speed session every week or tempo session is going to ultimately help increase that lactate threshold so that you can run faster for further. And that's the goal, is if you're trying to, like you said, race and get faster over the half marathon distance, then incorporating a interval session, a threshold session, or a fartlek session, just from my own experience, to give people something like that they can use, is I would alternate between a threshold and an interval workout, or a fartlek workout as your interval workout each week. So 1 week you would do a threshold, which would be, say you have a threshold of a certain, like, your threshold would be like 4 minutes per kilometer. And basically, to know your threshold is whatever pace you can hold for around a 10K. Whatever you can hold for 10K, then above that is usually what you would consider your threshold. So stay above whatever pace that is for 10K during your threshold sessions. And that will allow you to get better at clearing the lactate. And then the interval session, you want to be doing like these over-under intervals where you're faster than threshold and then slower than threshold. So you're learning how to clear lactate and then build lactate, and clear lactate and build lactate, just for a little bit more in the weeds of how I would ultimately program those interval sessions.
So essentially, intervals sometimes have a rest included, but your tempo runs is usually just at a pace, and it's for the whole distance, if that makes sense. So on to our second one, we're going to be talking about setting your half marathon goal time. And I feel like this is something that is very important, because if you don't have a goal time and you're just going to go out there to finish the race, I feel like that's just not a very smart way to go about it. So when I first was looking at my goal time for my half marathon, I told Calvin, I was like, okay, in my long runs, I was looking at all my statistics on data on my Strava, and I was like, okay, I'm running at around a 6:30 kilometer for my like longer runs. And I was like, okay, I think that's the pace that I could probably run my half marathon at. So I went into my half marathon going, I'm going to probably finish this half marathon running a 6:30 pace. So I went on to, you can just go onto any calculator website. If you just Google search like half marathon pace calculator or something, a lot of them are in miles, so you might need to just like switch it to kilometers. But if you find one for whatever metric you do use, you just go on the chart, you look at the time, and then it will tell you your goal time basically for your half marathon. So for my first half marathon, I thought I would run a 6:30. I ended up running, I think, a 5:55, which was like, I was mind blown. Like, after my half marathon, I called Calvin. I was like, there's no way I just ran that, because I never ran that fast in my actual runs. So it just goes to show, like, on race day with all the adrenaline and stuff, like, you might be able to run faster than you think. It might be smart to just like go with what you feel. Like, if you're a more experienced runner, though, like, I wouldn't suggest to just like push as hard as you can.
And the negative split, and we'll get into that.
Yeah. But basically, make sure you have a realistic goal time for your half marathon. That will help you a lot. And Cal's going to take over for your pacing strategies.
Yeah, so just to touch on what you're talking about is, like, when you're doing those interval sessions and you're doing those fartlek speed workouts like once per week in the 8 to 12 weeks leading up, those are the sessions where you need to like listen to your body, how you're feeling at those certain paces. Ultimately, you want to be getting better each week by week. That's like how you can determine whether your training plan is effective. And if you're getting slower, then you're doing something wrong. Either you're not getting enough sleep, you're not recovering enough, you're doing too much volume. So that is important. If you are seeing this progress with these speed sessions, then you need to use those paces to kind of say, okay, I can go this fast for this speed, so this is what I think I'm at for a half marathon. Now, once you're going into the half marathon, you need to think about the strategies that will help you stick to that goal pace. And I will say, like, the best thing about the half marathon race is because it's a race, you will have a mental sort of, what's the right word? Like adrenaline. Yeah. You will have adrenaline that will push you further than a normal training day. And so you need to rely on that in a certain sense to excite you a little bit. Those little nerves that you're going to feel, that like excitement, anxiousness, that will propel you to racing well if you are smart at the beginning. Because what a lot of people do is they use those nerves to then excite themselves so much in the first 2 kilometers that they can completely blow up. Mm-hmm. And then you're hanging on. And so ultimately use those nerves and excitement to like get you ready, but then be very cautious and be very strategic with coming out at something that you know you're going to feel comfortable going into the back half of the race. So start those first like 1 to 5Ks feeling in control and feeling like this is like the slower end probably of my pace. And then I'm going to negative split, which we've talked about, and just like understanding how you're going to work that negative split down. Now, with that being said, there will be pacers during the half marathon that normally carry flags or posts,
like a sign
with what time they're going to run. And this is one of the most valuable things.
It's literally the best thing ever. I didn't know this existed when I did my first half marathon, and it was a life changer.
Right. And I think if there's one piece of advice is if you can find those people in the starting corral, that is like your savior. Because if you can avoid having to look at your watch or guess what pace you're running, you're ultimately going to be running much more consistent. And the reason I say that is the most efficient way of getting from 0 kilometers to 21.1 kilometers is maintaining the same pace the whole way. Now, is that a realistic thing? No. The reason the negative split is so beneficial is because as you get in deeper into the race and moving faster, you're not climbing up this huge wall. You're like pushing into it and digging into it, and you save the hard part closer to the end of the race rather than getting halfway after starting out too fast and realizing you have still half the way to go. But that is like my biggest tip for anybody is, if you know the most efficient way is to maintain the same pace the whole way, then start a little bit slower than than what you want, and then keep on working that down. And if you can surround yourself with those what are they, pacers?
Yeah, pacers
that have that goal pace that you're with, and try and stick with them, because there'll be usually a group around them. That's your go-to strategy. And I think some people can maybe get in their head about like, oh, it's not as fun, like I'm not pacing myself, or like I know some people who would be like why would I do that? Why would I run with somebody who's just like pacing me through the, but like that's also a huge benefit. I think you have that resource and it's there for a reason.
What I was also going to add just quickly is like even if you're running with a friend, or you signed up to do this half marathon like with a friend, and you know that you guys are going to be running at around the same pace, just buddy up with them and just try to hold on with them. It's just so much more enjoyable when you get to share the experience with someone else. I did 2 half marathons last year. The first one, I ran it with a friend, and I think it was the first 17K we ran together, and then she kind of just like, I couldn't go any faster, so I just let her kind of go. But just holding on and being able to run beside someone that you know and you can chat to, and it's just more fun. And my second half marathon, I didn't have anyone, so it was a very different feeling. I enjoyed both, but I feel like if you're like trying to reach your goal time, it's definitely beneficial to be running with someone or with a pacing group. So yeah, that's it for your goal time. Third thing we wanted to talk about today is staying healthy, so injury prevention and kind of just listening to your body. So with running and half marathon distance running, there are some common injuries that can occur. So a lot of people struggle with shin splints, knee pain, IT band syndrome, maybe even back pain. And luckily, I'm one of the people that don't really struggle with shin splints at all. I think Calvin has probably struggled with it more than I have. You wear calf sleeves.
Yeah,
for
like I
shin
can
splints,
I can
or?
get into a little bit of my own just experience. So I'll quickly run through. So 4 years ago when I did the David Goggins challenge, the 4 miles every 4 hours, that's kind of when, so I had used my calf sleeves the whole time, because I remember maybe even getting shin splints earlier in my life from just like running randomly when I was younger. But then, like, I knew going into that it was going to be a serious issue, because I had always gotten shin splints for a long time, like anytime I would start to run again. And so these calf sleeves, though, had made the biggest difference. If I used to get shin splints after maybe running 5 to 15 kilometers, like a week or whatever it may be, that it would almost double the amount of volume for me to get the same amount of pain from shin splints. And so I just noticed that the compression around my calves was so beneficial, and in this like fascia that would keep everything a little bit more tight and prevent that irritation. The next thing, though, I want to talk about is just very recently, because going into this High Rocks that I did in Brisbane, I was building up my volume very consistently. And about 2 weeks before the race, I started to notice, I was telling you, I was like starting to feel a little bit of pain, a little bit of knee pain, and this IT band syndrome, which is just the band that connects the hip and the knee on the outside of your leg. And everyone says, like, you can't roll out your IT band, it won't help. And it's usually a deeper lying issue.
It's usually like, yeah, your vastus like medialis was like a lot of your quad
or even
glutes. Yeah.
And so that's what I found out after fact. So basically I did this High Rocks, I was okay, I was fine, and then I did a 20k run at like a really faster pace than I would have wanted to, because I was trying to keep up with a few people. And after that run, I had pushed through about even like 4 to 5k of just knee pain just to finish it. And I knew it was stupid in the moment, but it was just it was like reality.
One of those opportunities that you had to get in.
Exactly.
On it. Yeah.
Exactly. And my ego definitely was going to push me to the end.
Mm-hmm.
However, right after that run, I knew like instantly I needed to stop running, because it was about a week of this IT band pain and just like hip pain and knee pain that it was just unbearable. And I just knew that like, if I just bike and stay consistent with the biking, that it's going to be able to maintain some aerobic fitness and keep my VO2 max and my training and not detrain me. Because that's the worst with any sort of endurance training, is if you just stop cold turkey. That's what scares, I think, most endurance athletes. If you see like they get injured, it's like all the work, all the days that they've stacked. If you just get surgery and have to take a month or 2 months off of training, it sets you back tremendously in terms of where your aerobic fitness is. And so that's what I'll say, is being able to just not let my ego get the best of me, go on the bike for about a week and a half. And then now up until this point, like I did a zone 2 run with you, and I started to feel my knees act up around 7k again. Mm-hmm. So I didn't push through anything. And then this past Wednesday, just yesterday, I did a speed workout, and I did 10k of total volume, and right around 10k during my cool down run, I started to feel it again, but I just stopped. I didn't push through anything. And so now today I'm definitely going to emphasize rolling out my glutes, rolling out my hips, and like just being proactive so that I'm never pushing through any pain ever, and just setting my body up for the next session. I think that's the best piece of advice for any sort of shin splints or any pain is don't be afraid to use the bike or use other methods of cardio to maintain the fitness, but also know like you never push through pain.
Yeah.
Never push through the pain.
Yeah. And honestly, guys, my number one tip is to foam roll before your runs and do a good dynamic warm up. When I did my first half marathon training block, that made the biggest difference. I used to have the worst knee pain from my IT band syndrome, to the point where I would tape my knees and my IT band every single run, and it would help to an extent, but now I don't have to use tape ever. Like if I have some knee pain, like I can kind of push through it. Like it's not the type where Calvin like needs to completely stop. But I will say, if you have some sort of niggle, whether that's your knee, your IT band, your glute, your back, and you feel like it's going to really affect your training, go to a chiropractor. And this might be controversial. A lot of people don't support chiropractors and whatnot. My chiropractor that I went to didn't specifically just, crack your back. Like she used a variety of different techniques, and it was mostly massage actually that she used on me. It was called ART, which is active release therapy. So she would kind of assess where my tight spots were, where my weaknesses were, and she would put me into different positions and really just like get deep into the muscle tissue to kind of release the tension. And actually my hip is kind of what we found, was that my hip was causing my knee pain, but the reason my hip was tight was because my adductors were tight. So even though I didn't feel any pain in my adductor, which is right the inside of your leg, your inner thigh, I had no pain, like nothing that would make me think that that was the root cause. And we figured out that that was the problem. And ever since then, I've just been trying to focus on, making sure my adductors are really like nice and just rolled out and calm and not inflamed. And I feel like that's really helped. However, right now I'm kind of struggling with this hip mobility issue that's kind of come back. So we're in Australia, so I don't have access to the chiropractor that I went to back home. So I'm trying to find a solution and a place that, won't break my bank to go and get my body sorted out. But that is one thing I would recommend, is just to go and see a professional to see if it would work for you.
And I have like a slightly alternative option that I was just thinking about, because personally, like Tash knows, I've been to some like these physio. I did physios for two months when I was in California, and I didn't see a lot of benefits. And obviously everyone's issues are different, and sometimes people can help you, and sometimes it doesn't do what you need. And so personally, like I think the deepest root of a lot of my issues come down to just more massaging and more stretching. And if I could go to like a sports massage or even just like deep tissue massage at any sort of massage place, the nice thing about massages that I was thinking about is they don't require you to have like this intake kind of appointment that you almost don't do anything. And I think a lot of the frustration with that is like, if you don't have the insurance to cover the chiros, the physios and all that, like that first session, you're like, all right, I just spent like $200 to basically just tell them what's going on, and like hopefully they know what's going on. So if you are looking for something that might be able to get solved because it's like a connective tight muscle or something like that, then I would say go to like a massage place. And you usually can find a good masseuse or sports masseuse that can do something for you that should be able to help. And I think maybe that could be beneficial for me and you.
For me, I just feel like it's deeper than that. I think my issues are more like I need a chiropractor for it, or somebody who, like an osteopath, someone who just knows a little bit more than your average masseuse. But like everyone is so different, so you don't need to listen to me, but I feel like listen to your body. Go get help if you need help with your injuries, and know when to push, know when to back off. And yeah, so that was that kind of section. And we just want to touch on our next topic, which is going to be race fueling and training your gut for a strong finish. So
Are you thinking about what happened 3 weeks ago?
I'm thinking about what happened 3 weeks ago. Are you ready to talk about that yet? Okay.
No, we're not. Well, we can touch on it, but basically, 3 weeks ago, going into this High Rocks race, I had planned to take my go-to G1M Sport, which is a intra-workout carb mixture. You can take it before, but like what they're really known for is like this G1M Sport is really good for taking during your runs or just helping you propel you through like a long half marathon endurance marathon
Or
workout.
even biking, yeah.
Yeah.
Just whatever endurance.
And
yeah.
I had been taking this for quite a while, but because I only had a tub left, and in Australia you can't get it very easily, I had been saving it a bit, and so I had taken it, I guess, 2 days before or something, and I had a good experience. But then about 10 days, or no, it was less. It was like 5 days out from this High Rocks race, I took it, and in the middle of my run, I had the worst stomach pain, and for whatever reason, it stopped my run right then and there. And so I just decided I wasn't going to take it during my High Rocks race. And
you know what I think
it only takes one experience.
I think it was because you had trained your gut. Like when you were taking it back home in Canada, you're taking it like consistently, at least like maybe once a week, right? And then when you came here, you completely stopped taking it because you wanted to save it. But I think because you just suddenly reintroduced it back into your diet and your stomach wasn't used to it anymore, I think like that's kind of what happened.
It could have not even been that.
Yeah.
It could have been something I had eaten earlier in that day that could have just had a bad mixture with the G1M Sport too. And I think that's like the most important thing going into these endurance events, the half marathon specifically, is race fueling is so important, but it's also more important that you are consistent with it leading up to it so that your body's going to feel what it feels in training. And everybody says this, but like if you have a bad experience with a certain gel or a certain mix, then obviously look for something different. And what we learned about was like there's some that are meant to be, what is that called? The ones that are supposed to be taken with water.
Oh, isotonic?
Yeah. So isotonic gels versus non-isotonic gels. If it doesn't say that it's an isotonic gel, then likely the gel needs to be taken with water. So if you're going through these aid stations in the half marathon, you're going to want to get some water and then take the gel with the water. And some you don't have to. And so it's just important to know what gels you're using.
Yeah, and basically a lot of people just don't realize that carbs really matter. Like your body needs carbs and glucose to keep running. Like you wouldn't drive your car on an empty gas tank. You're not going to get anywhere. You need to be fueling your body with carbs, with gels, whatever you want to take. But do not try anything new on race day. You definitely want to experiment beforehand to see what works, what doesn't. There are a bunch of different gels out on the market. From what we know, there are a few that are better than others. A lot of them are maltodextrin based, which for some people's guts are fine. For mine, not really. It just depends on like who you are, how you can digest some stuff. But personally, I like the gels that are more natural based.
Like fructose.
Yeah, so just like honey stingers, which is like basically just pure honey. There's this brand in Australia called Pure Gel. It's mostly like natural ingredients. If you look at the ingredients on like a goo gel, like there are a lot of like chemicals and whatnot, and it's just like I don't really like to take those. But definitely race fueling is so important. Also, the benefit of taking maybe a caffeinated gel as well, or a caffeine pill during your race, if you really want to train in terms of like performance, that could be something you could look into, because there are really good effects of caffeine on race day as well.
And the two things I want to just add to this is start the fueling earlier in the race than you think. Like if you're doing a half marathon, taking a gel with it, like I would say for us, like I took 2 gels, but I wish I took 3 during my first half marathon. And you could start taking that first gel even around like kilometer 5, 6. And what I've noticed more recently is when you take gels, it's very common to feel a little dehydrated or thirsty because the taste of the gels usually have some sort of electrolytes or sugars or something that's like thick in your mouth. And some are good, but still you usually are going to want to then have just an idea of like going and getting some water to like keep on, because it makes you thirsty. The gels usually make you thirstier. Even though the gels are so important, the gels will make you more thirsty.
I would also recommend, this is what I did, but take a gel every 30 to 40 minutes. Even if you feel like you don't need it, your body will need it. And the hardest thing for me during my races was to just kind of get it down. But I felt so much better like once the gel actually kind of kicked in. So yeah, just don't underestimate race fueling. Train your gut also, so don't try anything new on race day. But yeah, those are kind of our
and the
tips.
the last one, the electrolytes, is understanding you want your electrolytes around double sodium to potassium ratio. So they say like double. You want your electrolyte profile to be double the sodium to potassium, and then some magnesium as well. And also just be aware of like how much do you sweat and what the climate of the race is going to be. If you're running this race in Hawaii or if you're in the Arctic Circle, you're going to be sweating a lot different.
Yeah.
And it depends on the time of the year. So just be prepared to know like if you're going to be in the sun and like it's going to be really humid, then you're going to need a lot more of an electrolyte plan because you're going to be shedding that much more. Yeah. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. Our next topic is going to be race strategy. So how to execute on race day. We have a few tips. So the first one being knowing the course. Calvin is a sucker for this. He like studies the maps, like looks at the elevation, plans all the hills, and like
I go into Strava,
like,
so
he knows to a T what the route is. Versus me, I kind of just like showing up the day of, and it's like, oh, I guess I just take this all in, and it's all new, and like I understand why you do it, but for me, it's just more fun to like not know. But I do understand the benefits of knowing the course and like knowing when the hills are going to be and whatnot.
And that's why I do it. And so just for anyone who wants to know how to do that, if you type your race course into Google, usually there will be like if you looked up like Sunshine Coast Marathon or whatever marathon you're doing, there usually will be a Strava post of like a previous marathon in the past that is somewhat similar to the course you're running, and you can make sure that they look the same, and then you can see based on the Strava like course, you can just see kind of how the course will change through elevation and like where it will go. And ultimately, like what we did this past weekend is if you can go to see where where the race is and just understand, all right, this is going to be over a bridge and doing this, you're gonna be more prepared and ready for what happens at different markers in the course.
Yeah, for sure. Next thing, pacing mindset. So definitely don't go out too fast. Negative splits will definitely win your races. So start slow. And if you can, negative split your race. If not, just try to keep the same pace throughout. For me, my first half marathon, it's actually funny. So when we drove there in the morning, we thought we would be able to go to the bathroom before the race, and we get to the start corral and we're like, oh my god, there's probably 2,000 people.
And this kind of happened in San Francisco too.
So now, like from now on, any race I'm going to, I'm just gonna know in my head and prepare mentally that there's not gonna be a toilet beforehand, because and honestly, I feel like men just have it a little bit easier in this case. Because I feel like you could just kind of sneak a wee in, like, you know, behind a truck or whatever, right? Like, anything. But definitely go to the bathroom before you leave your house. Do not drink too much liquid in the morning. I feel like that is also a very big tip. My first half marathon, I drank a whole thing of water and a whole thing of electrolytes, which I'm happy I did it because I know my body needed the hydration. However, I wasn't able to go to the bathroom to pee before my race. So the whole race, imagine the worst feeling of like full bladder
or even like water sloshing
you could ever feel. Like I'm literally telling my friends, I'm like, guys, I'm gonna pee my pants right now, like, and they're like, you can't go. I'm like, I know, how am I gonna run this thing? And the whole race mentally I'm like, just don't pee, and then I'm like, oh, there's a toilet, should I stop? And in my head I was like, no, you can't stop, because
It'll be so hard.
That leads me to my next point. Stopping in the middle of a race is so much harder than you think. Like, stopping and losing all your momentum and then having to go back to where you were, it's not an option for me.
This is why the Ironman is so insanely impressive.
Yeah.
Is racing for 12 hours, or even the pros at like 8 hours, when you realize like they're taking all this nutrition in, all these calories, and not shitting themselves or having to go to the bathroom, or they are peeing themselves. Just to be clear, like those guys, the highest level, they're peeing themselves on the bike. You see the water.
Themselves.
No, sometimes, but like they're definitely peeing themselves. It's a feral sport when you think about that. All right, let's get into the next thing, which is this will actually be my free speed. But so one of the things that I saw going into, it might have been a race, I think it was might have been the half marathon we did last year, it was a heat map of how different colors absorb different amounts of heat, and specifically the sun. And so most people know like black absorbs a lot more heat than white, but this is extremely important in knowing like what climate, like I touched on earlier, what climate, what temperature, and where you're racing. So if you know that you're going to be very hot, or it's going to be a very hot race, or even you just want to avoid being hot in all circumstances, then wear white. And I don't care. I really don't care if that's going to change like how I look, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I want it to look right, or I want to have an aesthetic, or I want to look a certain way.
No, wearing white is free speed.
That's the free speed.
Imagine wearing black on the Sunshine Coast Marathon when the sun is beating down on you.
And that's where I think it's funny how many people are so caught up in like looking good for the camera and all that stuff. Trust me, you can find a pretty sexy white outfit. Trust me with this one, white will ultimately be the coolest option in terms of absorbing heat. And so really consider, if your marathon's going to be hot, you could go full white night. You could go shorts, you could go tank, you could go calf sleeves, you could go shoes, right? And so just be very conscious about, if you're worried about it, if it's going to make a difference, if it's going to make that 1%, consider the clothing that you wear is going to actually impact how you are feeling.
Last thing I wanted to touch on was the mental strategies. So 21.5 kilometers is quite a long time. Like for most people, it's going to take you about 2 hours or more. So breaking the race into like checkpoints to just stay focused and stay on track is probably a really good tip, in my opinion. So something you could do is just kind of just make sure like you're looking out for all of the checkpoints that are actually like physically there, where it says like 5K, 10K, and then you kind of know, okay, this is where I am, this is how much I have left. Or you could go the other route, like what I did for my first half marathon and my second one. I went without music for kind of like as long as I could. And it's actually quite interesting because I used to like only be able to listen to to music. Like if you would ask me to exercise without music, I would be like, oh my god, that's like the worst thing ever. But ever since I started dating Calvin, he doesn't listen to music when he kind of runs or works out, and I've kind of started to adopt that mentality, and it's not as bad as you think, especially on race day, because you just hear the sound of everyone else's like feet hitting the floor and everyone's bells that are ringing, everyone's cheering for you, and it's just like to be in the moment and to like listen to everyone cheering for like whoever's on the course is just, it's a different feeling, and it's like you appreciate it more. I really appreciate it. So I would say maybe try not to listen to music for as long as you can, and then when you're really hurting, that's when I kind of just put my AirPods in and play some good tunes, and that's probably around kilometer 15, honestly.
And even the like the nutrition thing, like making it aid station to aid station, like once you're like you get a sip of water and you're like, oh, that was nice, then you're just thinking like,
Yeah.
I like just get to the next one and get to the next one. And that's what like you're exactly what you're talking about is just chunking the race up into these like small wins will help you mentally break it down. And so I even remember that half marathon where it was like I knew we were gonna like we came over the Golden Gate Bridge and then we were spinning around and then got all the way up, and then it was like, okay, get to the other side of the bridge. And then it's like when you're focused on getting to a landmark and like getting to that, you can get into this zone where you're like, I'm on pace, I'm sticking with the group, and I'm on, like, I'm going to get there. And like you're making sure all these like small little things are there. Yep, I'm in check, and now I'm right where I need to be. And that's ultimately how you stick to the plan.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Okay, so that was it for race day strategy. The last thing we wanted to touch on was recovery and what to do after your half marathon. So it's definitely important to listen to your body after your race. A lot of people react differently. So for my first half marathon, I couldn't walk for a week. Like I had put my body through so much shock and like stress of running so fast for that amount of time that I was never, like, I had never experienced that in my life. And I remember like the day after, I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like, I couldn't walk up down the stairs. I was like limping it. And the funny thing is that I had a High Rocks race booked 2 weeks after, and I've learned my lesson. Like, it takes you probably about like a good week to recover from a race of that distance, maybe even more depending on your fitness level. But after my second half marathon that I did in July, the next day I was working out again. I felt completely fine. And it just goes to show, like,
you train more.
If you train more, or if your body is just used to the volume. I don't even think I necessarily trained more. I just think my body was more used to it. So yeah, it was very, like, the second half marathon the next day, I was a little sore, but like I felt way, way better. So just get to know your body.
Well, can I say something on this? Like, one of the most important things I think you need to remember going into a race is you have your physical preparation and you have the mental preparation. Normally, you don't have to get your physical preparation to the same level if you are a very mentally tough person, because you can almost use the adrenaline to fake it a little bit and push through a lot of pain. However, that's usually the circumstance in which you will experience way more suffering and injuries and pain after the race. Is if you're someone who can kind of like under prepare because you're just really tough mentally, then you can get away with that, but then you're going to end up teetering that line of being way closer to injury. And I think that's where that is, like, you want ultimately to really be mentally ready and physically ready, but they go hand in hand, because sometimes when you get really physically ready, it makes you drained mentally. And so some people would rather be less physically ready and save a little bit mental and excitement for it. But that's where the easy sessions come in, and that's why you save the intensity for the race, the true intensity.
Cross training and active recovery is going to be super, super important. So you don't want to just completely stop working out for like a week after your workout. You want to just keep moving, go for walks. Obviously, listen to your body. If you're super sore, don't do like a resistance training workout. But, you know, going for a swim or a bike or a walk, like even the day after the race, is definitely going to help just rebuild all that muscle tissue and everything. Also, if you have access to sauna, cold plunge, recovery boots, use all of that recovery equipment if you can. I feel like that will definitely help speed up your recovery process. And
sleep.
And sleep, for sure.
The biking and the swimming and like the cross training is so good for just maintaining fitness while your body is able to recover your joints and everything like that, and easing back into just whatever baseline. And that's what you learn through going through these races, is just experience will ultimately teach you exactly how your body feels and what it needs. And ultimately what we've learned is don't push through more pain, is to ease off and find alternatives to keep on training consistently and maintain some fitness. So with that said, let's talk about the free speed of the day. Do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. My free speed is pinch and sip. And if you don't know what I mean by that, do you know what I mean by that?
Of course I know what you mean by that.
Okay.
Because I also I hate trying to drink water.
Drinking water when you're trying to run a half marathon or a marathon or any kind of race is the hardest thing ever, especially because they need to design, like, maybe that should be our next business venture.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They need to design cups that are
reusable.
Like reusable, or just like a cup that's like better designed to be able to drink. Like, imagine running at like a 4-minute kilometer and trying to drink out of a,
like, you're like,
it literally just gets all over your face. It doesn't even go in your mouth, to be honest.
Yeah, you almost like throw it into your mouth.
Yeah, you just throw it into your mouth. But the one thing I've learned, and I will use this for the rest of my life, is if you pinch the top of that paper water cup and kind of just like pour it and sip it into your mouth, it will go in much easier. So try to just pinch it together at the top and pour it in, and it will act like a
funnel.
Yeah,
almost like a funnel.
That's my free speed.
That is a good free speed.
Yeah.
My free speed is the color of your clothing matters. It does. It if you don't think it matters, then you probably don't suffer with overheating like I do.
A white knight will win the day.
I didn't want to say that, but thank you. So, yeah, don't be afraid to understand, like, get some like white clothing, wear like a white tank and some white shorts or whatever it is that will allow you to stay as cool as possible during these races. And most of these races are in the spring and summer months, and so it'll make a big difference. And also what I was just thinking is like chafing. Yeah, that's like free speed, is understanding that like either putting a little tape over your nipples or something like that, or a little bit of nut butter to help just a little bit of chafing if you worry about that. That's my free speed, is wear some white to reflect the sun and just be proactive with if you think you might be chafing, and you can avoid that.
Exactly. So guys, thank you for listening to this week's episode. You know, the half marathon, it's a super tough, but I feel like it's just a very rewarding distance. So if you have one coming up, or if you want to start training for one, just remember to train smart and respect the process, and the race day will just take care of itself. And
it's truly the gateway race into all other avenues of fitness. It's like trying weed when you're like 15 for somebody. It's the gateway race into fitness. I think that is what half marathons are. It's like the gateway drug of fitness.
It is like a drug, because then you just get addicted and you keep booking more races. And guess what? I'm running my first marathon in August, and I'm so scared, but I'm so excited for the feeling of crossing that finish line.
Exactly. And so the training will prove everything. But thanks for listening to today's episode 20. We really appreciate anyone who listens to these, and hopefully you've been enjoying not only the audio but also the YouTube and being able to watch these on YouTube.
If you guys are running a half marathon this year, leave us a comment on YouTube or on Spotify. Let us know which one you're doing. We're super interested to hear which ones you have coming up. Also, leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify. That would mean the world to us, and it would really help us just boost everything in the podcast space and help us get, future guests on the show and everything.
And that's really what we're leaning towards in our next step, is getting more clips up on TikTok, getting more clips up on all social media, and then that third thing, which is getting guests on the podcast to ultimately help the listeners and us like learn so much more about different things in fitness. So that'll be exciting.
So I hope you guys liked this episode of the Free Speed podcast, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you guys.